light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. My full name is Sister Who Does She Think She Is? Which is a wonderful double entendre, because in one sense, I suppose there's a certain audacity into being as flamboyantly different as I am. And on the other hand, to me, it's a basic question of integrity. And this basic question of who does she think she is? And further, what does this have to do with how I express myself to the world around me? And how does it change throughout my life? Because I am not the person I was 20 years ago. I'm not the person I was in college or high school. And in every situation, as I look back at it now, I'm wondering, how could I have been so naive? And in some ways, I was always ahead of my time as an old soul and a very intelligent person. But there were things I didn't understand until I experienced them. In that, or on that note, I recall reading once of how an author or writer will frequently write to a point and have to stop until they have experienced certain things, and then they know how to go on. But until they've had the experience, they don't know how to proceed. And I found that very much true of my own life, that I was working on a book manuscript. There's a book manuscript about the development of Sister Who that I keep meaning to finish, and I've been working on it for probably a couple decades now. But because everyone always wants to know what the story is. And I say, well, let me write it down because it's far too involved. And then I was trying to think of the right way to tell the story. And then I would write it to a point, and then I couldn't think of what to write next. And I had to stop, but then I would have an experience, and I would know what I was supposed to write next. The thing I guess I keep coming back to in all that, though, it's kind of below the surface, and I don't know if anyone really notices, is that I have always tended to see relationships as egalitarian rather than hierarchical. It's not that somebody is better or worse than me, or ranks above me, or is not to be questioned, or what have you. It's that we're all egalitarian. We're all on the same level. We're all learning and developing and growing, and some know this and some know that. But the idea is for all of us to be complementary. And because it's all egalitarian, whether you have been a politician or a movie star or a farmer, there are things that you understand that no one who has not lived your life does not understand. And if I were a famous actor or actress, for example, if I were a famous person in the cinema, if I were a TV producer, there would be things I experienced and personal relationships I had that would be different, but I don't know how to say they'd be better or worse than other ones. There are relationships which a farmer has and things which a farmer understands that may not be written down, but they allow the farmer to do what the farmer does, that the doctor or the lawyer or the businessman could not do. And with this note of everything being very egalitarian, I'm very much in favor of everyone receiving the same amount of pay for what they do also, because I don't know that it makes any sense to me that a farmer has to work 10 times as long for 1 hour of the doctor's time, when in fact how important the farmer is simply depends upon how hungry the doctor is. If they were egalitarian and it were not about who outranks somebody else or who's more important or less important, they're all important. It's kind of like the common saying in the theater, which I think goes back to the thespian Stanislavski. There are no small parts, only small players. The idea being that when you're performing a play, every single part, every entrance, every prop, everything has to be exactly on cue, or the whole performance will fall flat. So the added point that is often overlooked, though, when you're trying to decide, does someone see themselves as hierarchical or egalitarian? That because I outrank you, you are not allowed to question me. Well, if they're wrong, you had better well question them, and I hope they listen enough to figure out that they're wrong and correct it before they have to answer for it. I just slightly off color, but without going into any detail. I recall going through my master's program, and I was always a little disappointed, or more than a little disappointed sometimes, at the way people with doctoral degrees, signing their name PhD, had written things that I was now required to read and report on them, and so many of them I found that they hadn't proofread their work. The funniest and worst example, I think, was someone with a PhD who intended to write the word organism, scientific organism, and instead they misspelled and the computer corrected it the wrong way, but because it's really a word, the computer didn't take it out, and their work was published as them referring to a scientific orgasm. And I kind of closed my eyes and shook my head and thought, the poor person, because they are going to have to live with this for the rest of eternity, having signed their name to a published work that they meant to say organism, and instead the computer printed the word orgasm, which of course had everyone who read it absolutely laughing because it was the wrong word. And on one level, I would say proofread your work, and on the other hand, it's the similar sort of thing of, if we're all equals, then anybody can talk to anybody can listen to anybody, and every single one of us has the ability to make mistakes, even as glaring as that. If we proofread our work before it gets published, those mistakes can be caught before they become too big and too eternal. That one obviously wasn't. In any case, by having these egalitarian relationships, I could consider every farmer and factory worker I ever met to be just as intelligent as every PhD and professor and doctor and lawyer that I ever met. What is disturbing, I suppose, is the extent to which people want to put their identity in their status instead of in themselves. I am who I am because I outrank you. Well, not to me, but perhaps if you're someone who sees relationships in a hierarchical fashion, you would think that you outrank somebody. But as I said, the only thing that determines who is more important, the farmer or the doctor, is how hungry the doctor is. If the doctor is absolutely famished, the farmer becomes pretty important. If the farmer is injured dealing with a particular piece of machinery, the doctor becomes pretty important. Ultimately, the entire all of humanity is interacting and exchanging things in various ways. And whether one is important at any point in time is mostly dependent upon what one's role in that moment is. And if one has no role in that moment and one is not more important, the thing I keep telling people, that disappointment, I know it's not really disappointment, but one of the frustrating limitations of human life is that we are finite, that we are creatures of time. And I've said over and over again, we're creatures of time. No matter how wonderful a moment is, no matter how sumptuous the meal that the farmer prepares is for the doctor, or no matter how effective the doctor's intervention is when the farmer is injured, you can't stay in that moment. Time marches on, and we're creatures of time, and as quickly as you can experience a moment, it has already passed and is a memory. You can't stay there. You have to keep going. And that's why in the traditional marriage vows, the vow is written to say, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part. That this is a shared experience. This is a relational individuality. The one spouse is one person, the other spouse is the other person, and they are making a commitment to each other to be there with and for each other. Neither one of them can guarantee their own longevity. Neither one of them can guarantee what they can or cannot give, but they are making a commitment that says, when times are bad, I'm not leaving. When you're sick, I'm not leaving. When you're poor, I'm not leaving. There are so many families and relationships now that, and when I see on some of the social networking sites that I go to, people who are looking for relationships, but they want a relationship that doesn't cost them anything. And well, if you get what you pay for, then how much could a relationship that costs you nothing really be worth? And if you only want relationships that cost you nothing so that you have no personal investment, what kind of commitment will you have? And can you actually say to that person, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part? And if you have no commitment, why are you getting married in the first place? And, because marriage is all about commitment. The flip side of that says, okay, we won't have marriage, nobody will be committed to anyone. Then you have a society in which nothing functions. If the farmer is not committed to the doctor is going to go hungry. If the doctor is not committed to the farmer will die of his injuries. And that goes for everybody in between. There needs to be this egalitarian commitment instead of deciding who is more important for another, who is above somebody else, who outranks somebody, only within a particular context. At one point I had people trying to argue with me that truth is relative. And I said, no, it's not relative, it's contextual. There is a difference. To say it's relative is to say that anything may or may not be true at any point in time. And all you have to do is try to orchestrate life in such a way that it remains unimportant, then you'll never have to deal with it. If instead you say truth is contextual, you understand that life includes all of these things, that you cannot get through life without including all those things, that every life will include a dinner table, a bathroom, a bedroom. Those three things have to be there. You have to have sleep, you have to have food, you have to have some place for waste to be limited. And I joked with a friend the other day when somebody didn't want to be part of the maintenance of a particular environment. And I said, even in paradise, somebody has to clean the bathroom. And of course she laughed, and that was fine. But my point being that every life is composed of things you want to do and things you don't want to do. And hopefully there is some kind of balance, but it still leaves you with this tension, I guess, of figuring out in what order, according to what plan, and how do you make things reasonably convenient so that you have more energy to deal with other things, with other challenges. If it's too much work to deal with a particular challenge, then you don't have as much energy or time to deal with the other challenges, and more things are left undone. If you understand that everyone, from the king and queen to the beggar on the street, they all have to have access to a sanitary bathroom. That at least once every 24 hours, every single one of them has to have access to a bathroom. That places a parameter on our own life, and it places a limitation on the way life has to unfold. And if you're doing things hierarchically, somebody's going to be left with unmet needs, and the whole system is going to break down. The play is going to fall flat. Somebody will trying to say their lines and not be able to say it. I remember one time I was in a community theater production, and a particular man totally missed his entrance, and I was finishing my line, and I'm supposed to be interrupted, and so I'm trying to think of what to say, and I'm just sort of stumbling, and the actress I'm talking to understood what was supposed to happen, and leaned over and yelled at the wings, "Is that you over there?" And of course that made the man remember, and he came stumbling onto the screen, and the play resumed. But it was a way for her to cover and keep things going, because I couldn't come up with anything else to keep it going. But it was a wonderful cover, shall we say. The point, I guess, that I keep coming back to, though, is that it was an egalitarian relationship. We were all doing a community theater production, and everyone had to be there at the times we were to be there and to do the things that the director had told us to do. If somebody was assuming that it was a hierarchical relationship of who are the important ones and who are the unimportant ones, then the fact that someone missed his cue might not matter if he was a major role. And it might put more pressure on others to cover in the meantime. I'll be here whenever I feel like it. No, in a play, everyone needs to be there on cue and follow the script. And in a similar sort of way, when we're dealing with life, when you get injured, the doctor needs to be there. When you're hungry, the farmer needs to be there. When you are trying to send a letter to your relative, the postman needs to be there. It's all of us interacting in ways that are collaborative and mutually supportive. It's not about deciding who's more important or less important than anyone else. Those who try to operate in the fashion of who's more important and who matters and who doesn't generally have a trail of debris behind them, all kinds of problems that they've created, that somebody else has to very benevolently and generously and kindly go behind them, picking up all their messes. The challenge of that, of course, is that this doesn't have to happen, and if it happens too many times, they might be eliminated from that particular interaction, and somebody else will be given to replace them. No one should be replaced. By making themselves unreliable and uncommitted to others, certain people make themselves dispensable, make themselves people who should be replaced because they're not doing the job. The whole notion of do what you want or I'll fire you in an employment situation, the only reason that started is because somebody didn't do their job, or because of a personality conflict, or somebody wanted this person gone because they didn't like them or something. Instead of focusing on the work to be done, they're focusing on the personality conflicts and on something that is totally not related to the work. Instead, if it was an egalitarian sort of relationship, each person says to the other, I need you to be here. What is it you need in order to be here? I want to make sure that you have your needs met so that you're in a place to meet my needs. In all of that, individuality remains important, because the only reason you're involved at all is because you have the words and the understanding and the ability and the costume, if you will, the ritual garb, whatever it is, you have what's necessary to address and meet the need. And the moment you don't have that anymore, either someone needs to provide it for you and make this a symbiotic relationship rather than a hierarchical one. It's a parasitic hierarchical relationship basically says, I have what you need and I'm going to give it to you when I see fit. And if I don't give it to you in time, you'll starve to death and I won't care. What they fail to understand in that situation is that when the other person isn't there, the true nature of life is that it's symbiotic. And when the other person isn't there, you can't continue yourself. It would be like saying, how could humanity exist on a planet that had no plants? And the answer is they couldn't. Plants put oxygen into the air and take carbon dioxide out. Humanity puts carbon dioxide into the air and takes oxygen out. Humanity and plants have a symbiotic relationship. Either one will die without the other. Even no matter how much you insist that you are a self-made person and you're independent and you can make it on your own, yada, 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 you can't. Because if there isn't something there to put the air that you breathe, you can't see it, but if it's not there, you'll know it in a second. And you won't be around very long when that happens. It kind of reminds me, bridging to another metaphor, it kind of reminds me of the canary that reportedly was used by miners to detect poisonous gas within the mines. They didn't have ventilation systems at that time, so they would take a canary into the mine with them. And the canary, if anything went wrong with the canary, that would be basically their clue to get out of the mine now. because the canary could sense poisonous gas long before they could. And by the time they sensed it, they would probably be passing out and dying inside the mine. So the canary would usually sacrifice his life, but the point is that they would bring it into the mine and watch the canary, and as long as the canary was healthy, they were too. My spiritual godmother, Sister X, pointed this out in terms of people who are dressed in drag, whether it's the drag of a nun or whether it's female impersonation or what kind of drag it is. It's not really the point so much as that it's people who dress in ways that are anomalous, whether they're goth or whether they're drag queens or leather people or whatever. They dress in a way that brings them a sense of integrity. Why are you dressed that way? Because this is how I dress. Not because I'm trying to satisfy your expectations, but because this is how I dress. And the only answer at that point should be, oh, okay, no problem. Where this becomes challenging is in people having judgments about it. There were a number of schools, for example, that I heard of in the past that wouldn't allow what they considered to be gang paraphernalia to be worn because the gangs would begin having fights in the school. This is kind of dealing with the symptoms again, because going back to the beginning of the problem, the reason we have gangs is because the family structures and family relationships are not what they should be. And so as the family structure breaks down, people are looking for familial relationships within whatever gang is inviting them to become a member. And then, of course, they become defined by their competition with another gang. Instead of becoming defined by their own integrity, they become defined by who they oppose. And again, it's a hierarchical kind of relationship rather than an egalitarian one. If it was egalitarian, then it's a question of everybody find your familiar relationships in whatever way you can, with whomever you can. And I have no judgment to offer. Whatever is honest and consensual, it's entirely up to you. Because we didn't address the families, we had more gangs. Because we had the gangs, we then didn't want them having fights in the school, so we said you can't wear the colors or the paraphernalia or whatever appearance that the gangs might have had. And so then we have students whose very attire is being regulated. Instead of dealing with the original problem, they're trying to deal with the end symptom. If you don't attack problems at their source, if you don't go for the causes, a myriad of additional manifestations will occur. To the extent that we do not address the breakdown of the family and create strong families, we will have gangs. To the extent that we do not create strong communities, we will have gangs and crime and all sorts of other things. When somebody asked me once a number of years ago, how do you stop terrorism in the world? And I suggested to them that the most effective solution I could think of was to make everyone into middle-class bourgeoisie that have no needs whatsoever. And if you can make everyone into complacent middle-class persons, no one will be willing to be recruited for a terrorist activity. The one drawback in that, of course, is people who are looking for familial relationships. But if you can find familial relationships and a complacent middle-class sort of status, there won't be any crime because nobody will need to steal anything. But the thing that will become a problem is people trying to find a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And that, of course, is where sisterhood diverges from drag queens. That where drag queens look for glamour, sisterhood looks for meaning. And constantly coming back to this point of meaning. And trying to emphasize to people that meaning and purpose in our lives is far more important than most people realize. And that if an individual does not have a sense of meaning and purpose, it becomes difficult to figure out why we're getting out of bed in the morning. Why one is getting out of bed in the morning, why one is going through the struggles. As an autistic especially, if I can't come up with a sense of meaning and purpose for all the struggle that I go through every day, it becomes that much harder to get through it and not to be depressed by it. Somebody called me up the other day and asked, a medical person, and asked if I was feeling depressed. And I kind of laughed and said, if you're not feeling depressed these days, you're probably dead. And they laughed also at that point. But the point being that there are so many challenges in life these days that are depressing. The challenge to our humanity in the midst of all this is to find ways to transform that raw material into something meaningful and empowering and beautiful. To take, well, the example that comes to mind as we wind up our show, somebody, a particular company wanted to be supportive of gay and lesbian couples. So they had a commercial that showed gay and lesbian couples. The religious conservatives of every definition sent them all kinds of hate mail saying we don't approve, we're going to boycott your company, we don't like this, etc. The company wisely took all these letters that they'd received, full of hate and full of everything horrible that could be said, and gave them to a couple artists and said, make this something beautiful. And the two artists folded them into particular shapes that would stand up and created a floor arrangement of all these hate letters that spelled out the word love. And of course, the end result was positively beautiful, but it was entirely made of hate letters. But that is where we come back to the core essence of humanity, that we can take things no matter how basic or horrible or awful or unsuitable they may seem, and we can transform them into something beautiful, and we can grow and learn from the effort.